All right. So everybody has their hand out like this? Yep,
Yes, got it.
thank you. All right, so what we're going to do is, oh, come on, where's that? Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through and if you can help me make sure that if somebody sees somebody in the chat room, help me out with that. I really appreciate it. So on your checklist, basically this is for contracts. And so your Form 20, which is multifamily, individual residence, 23, a manufactured home, 25 and 29. Oh, I'm sorry, that should be 28. That's a typo. And that's the condominium. And so I'm not going to look at every one of those forms. I'm just going to go through and show you what I look at. When it gets to compliance and you're inserting, I just have to say, please just insert the one form. And I know it's a pain, but probably the most common thing on a Form 21, let's just say, we'll just call it Form 21, is that people will put the entire contract. And that doesn't do any good, even though it's a part of it. So I do return it and I say, please just submit form, whatever number it is. And that happens frequently. And Ashley's not here, but one of the things that I see on the label is it says the complete contract. And I thought we had taken that out because we're doing all these individual ones. Okay, so if we look at Form 21, when I go through and I look at it, then the very first thing I do is I say, okay, there's 2 buyers and 2 sellers. And so therefore I kind of mentally do that so that I say, okay, I'm going to be looking for signatures from 4 people on every page as I go through this upload. So I do not look specifically at content. It is just the overall completeness. If I notice something that is not a part of it, then I will say something. Now, one of the things that I do in my log, and I'm sorry, I just wanted to show you what I do. Okay, well, this is fine. When I come to command, right up here is a good example. Then I just put in my logbook that I am Command MC, which is the access that I have. Then I just put the name and then I just put the house number. And then I put like all of these were all approves. And so I just keep a little log on that. I don't know what document I can't go back and say that this document went and this document didn't, but it just kind of helps me know. And then too, if it's one that looks familiar, I will be going through, maybe there's 15 or 20 different review people or contracts that I need to come in, either listings or contracts. Then if I return one, many times before I get to the back of the log or the list, many of you will have resubmitted that form and it's approved and then it's done. So this particular one, we want you in the contracts, we want you to be successful. So take a minute and look and make sure, is this document complete? Now, if it isn't complete, I've probably already said something on the contract review. And so one of the things that I do keep track of is the earnest money. And I do write it in my log if it happens to be earnest money, so that if an additional document down, if they have the earnest money receipt, or I can just go back a day or 2 usually and get it, then I find out when is the mutual date, how much money right here, and what was the delivery. I always check and make sure that to be held by for our brokers, that it's the buyer broker, I mean, the closing agent, because we do not have a trust account in that. So those are the things that I jot and I write down, and then I just look for completeness. And I don't do any review at this point because it's mutual, so it should have already been looking. So then I do look for the buyer's and seller's signature, and then also I only put in just 2 pages on this first one. Then I make sure that the initials on each of the 6 pages are there. So in your little cheat sheet there, the very first one is I review overall completeness, but please just make sure that you get just that form. If it has a 22A, then I try and make sure that it's logical. I mean, that it makes sense. Otherwise, I'll send a note to somebody and say, this doesn't make sense. And I just kind of look at it real quick. Just remember, in this particular section of your 22A, you pick either A or B. A is like 95% of the time you're going to do that. So you put your days in there. And wasn't that interesting about what Michael said? If it was an FHA and then the loan, it's canceled, it's on that house for 6 months. I'd never heard that before. That's awesome. And then that to best protect our buyer, then we want to make sure that we check the will not. We had one, Tom had one day before yesterday where the house was like under 600,000. They were putting 200,000 down. This guy is worth a lot of money. And so we use B and then the appraisal so that they do have a way to protect themselves if the appraisal comes in way under, which it won't. This was a beautiful home. Okay, and once again, I look for initials. I just peruse this, make sure that it's not something extraordinary. And again, the initials on the bottom of the page. Those are the things that I look at for compliance. Okay, 22B. If this is a document that's in there, then I will go back, then I'll get out of this document and I'll go back to the 21 and I'll make sure there's no closing date. Because when you have a 22B, what dictates the closing date?
The closing and the contingent.
Yes, on the other home. Really good, Chris. And so it should either say see Form 22B or leave it blank. So that's the first thing when I get a 22B, I get out of this document and I have to go back and look at their 21 and make sure that that is correct.
A quick question, if I may.
Yes.
Contingency of different type. Say an individual has to liquidate some investments, let's just say some stock options or something, not just like mutual fund that they can sell and receive the proceeds in 3 days, something more involved, like
yeah, if you get into your 401k or
401k, get a loan against the 401k.
Yeah.
Or
okay, so that would be on evidence of funds.
on evidence of funds. Okay.
Yes, and that's disclosure on where that money is coming from.
Okay.
So keep that question and then we'll go over that and we'll take a look at how we could fill that. There's more than one way that you can do that. I just want to stress on this one how important it is to be sure that your buyer is telling you the right information, because inadvertently the fraud thing is a really big deal. And so we want to make sure that if we're doing this contingent sale, that they understand that they have to apply for a loan. And then I wanted to point out here, this paragraph 3 supersedes the requirement for the buyer's loan application in Form 22A. I just want to reiterate that. And then if there's a like a backup, then it has to be on Form 39. If you are accepting another offer, and that explains the process to this buyer, that they may get a notice and they have 5 days to respond. Are they going to waive the contingency, or are they going to terminate the deal? And
So that's called the
bulk clause. Yeah.
clause.
yeah. And
So,
sometimes,
Marsha-
Chris, when you're in town, come by the office, and then Tom just gave Jose a wonderful document on contingent sales. And it's
My pleasure.
and we can just walk you through that, and then because there are so many ways that they can we can get in trouble. And then again, I'm looking for completeness, which is it filled out and are the buyers and sellers initials on it? Okay. Then this one is really critical. If you're doing seller finance, then there are some things that you need to be able to know. And just very briefly, I'll go over them. For an example, if it's vacant land, then almost always you want to click will not be used for a residential dwelling, even if they're going to be building at some point. But tomorrow, you're not going to put up a mailbox and get all your mail there. You're not going to be living there. That's what that means. Now, if you have owner financing on a home, then the property will be used as a residential building. And there are certain rules depending on which box that you fix on that. I just wanted to take a look that on this form, it's the same thing at the bottom. When you look at page 2, no matter which, if it's an assume or if it's a deed and trust, if it's a real estate contract, you have to fill this section out. This is very important. And this is where you talk about the earnest money that they put on the first form of their purchase and sale agreement, additional down payment, and what's the total down payment going to be. You want to make sure that you figure out what the interest rate is, and it typically starts occurring on closing. And then you want to choose one of these 3. Is it going to be principal and interest? Is it going to be interest payments? Like yearly or whatever, you'll have to specify what that is, but you need to choose one of these. And then the day that the payments start. Okay, so we're in the middle of September. If I were to do a seller finance right now, at a minimum, I would not have the first payment before December 1st. But I would probably go to January 1 because there's a lot of work in escrow and the company that you set up the payments with, and it just can't be done overnight. So I allow at least 45 to 90 days before that first payment. Okay. So now if you're going to use a note in deed of trust, then you only fill out D. And the thing that I want to really point out here is a lot of times they don't put down first, second, or third. It says first if not filled in, but it's really better that we check that. And the promissory note, which is a form LPB 28A. And I'll show you in just a second how to find that very quickly. The reason that that's important to know is if you're going to choose, majority of time down here, you're going to choose B, and that's going to be a form 22A. And what that has in addition to what was 1 or A is it has a due on sale. So if I'm financing my property and I'm selling it to Chris, if he wants to sell it, I want to be paid first. And that's what that means, that 22A. That's why the majority of time we're going to use that. Matter of fact, I don't think I've ever done, we use a B, in the form 22A. It is very important here that you put how far out is the balloon payment. Are they doing it for 2 years, 5 years, and then you just take your start date if it's December 1st, 2023, then you go out 5 years, and that I think is December 1st, 2028. And that's how you fill that part out. Right in here, the default is fine, but I saw one the other day where they changed it to 12%. And then if you change it, then just write in the appropriate box. And then always, to protect your seller, no further encumbrances. In other words, they can't take another loan out on this property. So you want to be paid off, you want your seller to be paid off. And again, I check and make sure. Now, if you don't use D, then the other option is E, and that's a real estate contract. And you notice here that the form is LPB form 44. When you do an offer and you're representing a buyer, whatever the forms that are called out in either the note and deed of trust or the real estate contract, you have to have blank one of those attached so that your buyer and seller can initial just page 1 signifying, I understand in escrow, the escrow office is going to have their on-call attorney, and that's how they're going to write this up. So if you use this one, you cannot fill out anything on D. And a lot of times people will put information in both. Usually you'll want to put due on sale. In this particular one, you'll want to make sure that you give the balloon payment date. This is where on this one, remember you fill out all the financials in that one section, and then you either do D or E, or if they assume a loan, and you really, if you're doing a wrap, does everybody understand what that is? I have a loan on my property for, say, $75,000. The down payment is not going to be enough to pay that loan off. So what we set up, and it has to be approved with a loan company, is what's called a seller wrap. So 75,000 of the balance that's remaining is going to go to that loan company. And let's say I'm selling it for 150,000. We're taking off 25. So that additional 50,000, you're going to pay me back at whatever interest we talked about. And the buyer is going to send a payment in to pay for that. Well, as the seller, how do I know that they're going to pay for that before 90 days gets, and then I have 3 months late and they're going to foreclose on me? So a wrap loan is just not a good idea.
Let's say a seller is responsible for making the payments on that paragraph.
Yeah. And so if I'm giving all this money, how do I know that's being paid? I just have never done one of those. If they're going to take over an existing loan, and so they're going to pay the equity as a cash down and then get that seller out, then they'll assume that particular loan. Just not good. This one is very, very important if you are doing any seller financing, and your escrow officer will know who they really like to work with. There's Evergreen Note Service, and there was like 1.5 years when they were horrible to work with. There was Cascade. There's People's Bank used to do it. I don't know how many.
Nobody in the city of East Wenatchee does it anymore. There's like Spokane, There's, some in Seattle, but yeah.
Yeah, and so Estella just said that there's not anybody anymore. I thought the Cascade Bank in Moses Lake did it,
They might, I didn't.
but they were the ones that we set up. It was like 120 days later and it still hadn't been set up right.
That was Wheatland.
Was that
Yeah,
that was Wheatland?
And we set it up through the local one and they changed it all to Freighter or Moses Lake or wherever that was, and it was a nightmare.
Yeah.
But that Northwest Collections or something is who bought out the Wheatland Contract Collection Company.
Oh, okay.
So, and I can't remember where they're located, maybe somewhere northwest somewhere,
Okay,
but they're an option, and I
Yeah.
thought people still did it, but they just won't hold documents.
yeah.
They don't do it at all.
No,
So if before you start that, you need to find out if the place to go and the place to start is your escrow officer. They're the ones that have to set it up so they know. And it's really important, if you're going to do one of these, call your escrow officer, because as far as well, first of all, you want this one, the collection account as an escrow. You want to ask them, what are the ones that you want to make sure that we to make your job easier, that we mark. And that's it. So seller financing is a little bit different. And I really think that anybody that's under 2 years should go through one of the many coaches here if you've never done one. And so they can help you through. Someone that's also very good at that is Tom.
Can I make a comment about that? Because
Yes.
I think it's important to start the application process for the contract collection prior to the closing date.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I've had the experience a lot of times where I send them with the closing papers and they don't come back with the closing papers, but you're not gonna hold up closing. So I would think if possible, try to obtain the contract collection blank paperwork ahead of time. I tried to send them out as far ahead of time if I knew, because they need to start working on those, because they do tend to take a little bit longer time. And then when it gets down to closing, they just don't send them back with their closing
Yeah.
papers.
So the comment was, allow time for this, because it's not gonna be overnight. I've never seen one that was all set up by the time closing date came, but they were far enough along in the process that the buyer and seller felt comfortable. So a collection account is sort of like a bank statement. Both sides get what the balance is, how much was principal, how much was interest, and that way there's no argument. It's done. And at the end of the year, there's a interest. I mean, for your IRS, there's a form that's made out. It's really a nice service. Okay, so 22D, the main thing I look for, not only is it filled out up here, but number 1 is the square footage. And number 2 is that there's no checks here, because that's the best for your buyer. It is individual on each particular one. I check for signatures, and on this one, I check for signatures. I've already given comments on the review if the seller's disclosure and the Washington State pamphlet, those things that are in there, but I did not include that on this, because this is what do I look for compliance. Okay, moving right along to 22E. And I didn't put it on the list. And I will try and correct this and then include it. Let me just make a note on that. There are only 3 things I look at. I make sure that box is checked on line 10, that there's a complete address and they've done am or am not. If they do am, then I have to stop. I always make sure that they have signatures. This isn't always filled in, and it isn't part of my compliance. But if it is that they are, then for it to be approved in compliance, then there has to be one of these checked and then the buyer signature. It doesn't happen very often, but every once in a while that will happen. And I'll update this information and put this on the cheat sheet here. Okay, evidence of funds, Chris, here we are. So it just goes into talking about contingent means a buyer does not currently have, and non-contingent means they have access. So like our Les Schwab, no, Les Schwab, yeah, is that right? Charles Schwab. Yeah, that's our tire place. We have a statement every month of money that's available for if we sell something, and then money that's available to invest with. And and it takes 10 days for them to be able to send a check if we request a check. So even though it's cash sitting in the bank in Charles Schwab, that is real iffy. And that if you use that example, then you would check this, and then I would put maybe another 2 or 3 days on there for you to be able to get the funds into the account. Okay, so now your example was they were going to use, say it again.
Oh, some more intricate investment instruments like future contracts. Futures have expiration dates and so forth. It may not be advantageous.
Or they have a CD that's going to mature in 30 days or something like that. Okay. So we would check 3, and then we would describe the type of account it is. Like I would put, if I chose to disclose it here, I would put Charles Schwab. Please allow 10 days for money to be put into our checking account, something like that. You notify it, and then what you would want to do is then you would have a screenshot of that statement and mark out any information. You could leave the last 4 digits of the account, but make sure there's no Social Security or anything like that. The down payment program, I've seen 3 of them come through, and you have to put in the name of it, Washington State Down Payment Assistance Program, or whatever the legal program that it is. If it's a gift from grandma, how much is it? And who is the person? I believe if Michael were on this call with us on this training, if you have cash and it has not been in the bank, I think it has to be in the bank 30 or 90 days for them not to be concerned. In other words, you have a savings account. If you are paying all cash, but we can verify that with Mike, but they don't like for you to just go down to the bank and put in $30,000. The whole disclosure, is it laundered money? Whatever.
Well, certain things can be tricky. Like for example, a lot of people now put by government treasuries short term, because of the interest rates are 5-6%, short term, 2 months, 6 months, and they buy direct. Not a lot of people know this is available. So people buy direct paper from the government and basically keep it in government account or keep paper at home. And this matures at a certain point. Maybe it matures 10 days prior to closing. And maybe the buyer wants to wait until maturity, deposit money 10 days before the closing. Otherwise, they will have to pay the
penalty. Yeah.
Is something like that?
Yes, then that would be an other.
But that will be deposit coming from nowhere, really, because let's just say I have the $30,000 in government short-term government paper. Boom! All of a sudden,
this whole document is evidence of funds, and you would just need to show wherever you go to look at that online, you would just need to show that statement, take out the
And that's
critical
usually
information, and that will be sufficient, as well as a long conversation with the other broker.
I'm asking those questions because I wasn't involved in the transaction, but I was close to someone who was dealing with it.
Yeah.
And there was some issues.
Sure. And then there's the, if you take it from your 401k, or you have an IRA or something like that, and there's a significant penalty for pulling it out, prior to when you're able to do that. So there are those circumstances.
You're allowed so much on the 401k.
Mhm.
If it's for a primary residence. I don't know what that amount is, but there
Yeah.
is a grace amount that you can use without paying penalty.
There's
Okay.
also law.
So the comment was that on your 401k, there's a grace amount that you can use without penalties if you're buying a primary residence. Okay. And evidence of fund with signatures. Section or 2 or 3 is a complete info, and I've reviewed documents where I sent it back, and every time they fill this out, they changed the way that the form was 22EF, because they did not have the conversation. Can you get that? Is it like going to your bank? And can you get those funds, or is there a process that you have to go through? And we have to be really careful. So when next form is a 22J, probably the most missed thing, if they pulled it down in Associated Docs, is it doesn't have a date for the contract, and it doesn't have the buyer's name. If I'm going to reject one, that I would say over 50% of the time, you download it, you put it in with your offer, and you just don't think about it because it's so automatic every place else. If I'm reviewing it for compliance, then one of these have to be checked. The seller has to sign it, and the buyer initials here and the seller initials here. And these dates can be different. Like when they fill this out, they can sign it then. And then as the contract comes through, they can sign it here, initial it, or they can do it all at one time. It really doesn't matter. Then I make sure, and remember with this new 2023, now it says buyers receive the above seller's disclosure in all documents, if any. And now we want the buyer initials on that one. If this isn't filled out here, how do you know? You don't know if there's any records or if there's any issues or whatever. And so on this particular one, you can include it in your contract, but your seller really has to fill it out, and then it goes back to the buyer, blah, blah, blah. That's why it's good to fill it out in advance. And then we get the buyer signatures, we get the broker. This is the second most place where I will turn it back. One or both of the brokers have not signed this. And then again, another place for the buyer and sellers. So when you upload a document, just take a second and look, does everything look complete? Okay, so that was J. The next one is K. This is for compliance, and so it must be completely filled out. So if they pulled it from the Associated Docs, then maybe 30% of the time this part isn't filled in. So you want to make sure that's filled in. And then you want to make sure that if you identify a utility, that you have the name, the address, city, and state. This other stuff is optional. And as I talked many times, I can't believe they don't put a phone number down. But anyways, they don't. And then I make sure that it's fully signed here. This will be returned if just electricity is Chelan County PUD. And I'm sorry, that's what the auditors are going to be looking for. If no utilities, maybe this was included in a contract and they didn't know if they had electricity, or maybe it's been turned off and there's no electricity at the house and you're gonna renovate and all of that. Please just put in, just take a piece of paper and just type in no utilities, form 22K exempt. If you just upload that, then I just approve it. That's it. Otherwise, it will say like for a residential that it's mandatory. And so that helps me. Also, what's happened is Lisa has gotten in the habit of sending me a note in command. Do you know that you can send a note? Yeah. So she'll send a note, she will submit the paperwork, and then another way that she does that on the 22K and also on the Form 17. If she's representing a buyer and it's an estate, then she'll just put that on a piece of paper. You know, Form 17 exempt this estate sale. It doesn't have to be a lot, but that way then I just approve it and it's done. I always appreciate those notes. I don't always respond. Let me see the next one. Okay, so here, I was talking with Vanessa this morning and I really put her on the spot. Maybe it was yesterday afternoon. And I asked her, should we be using these forms? And if we are, how do we know, representing the buyer, if the title has been eliminated or not? So what I'm going to do is next week, Vanessa's going to help me and we're going to go over this form. I'll get into the manual and we will talk about it from escrow and also from a broker's perspective. So on this particular one, I just find out which one have they chosen.
What form is it?
That is a 22 MH, manufactured home addendum. And we'll talk about why we should be using them more frequently. Okay, which I appreciate. Okay, so the next one is a 22Q. When that's included and uploaded, then I go back to the 21 as an example. And I see if a closing date has been established. This, of course, information is important, but I look for the address and the date. The date of the pending sale is the purchase and sale. It's the date that the broker wrote it. So if you get a copy of it, it's on the upper left-hand side. That's the date that you put in there. If you get a copy of that, then you need to be uploading that into command. And then there are plenty of places where associated docs that you can title it Form 22Q purchase PSA or something like that, just so that I know that it's, and that will be, I'll just go through it and just approve it. I probably shouldn't say that, but I will. Okay, so 22Q, I make sure that it has the correct number of signatures. And then the rest of these are going to go pretty fast. Your form 22R, which is your well addendum, then I'm looking, typically I just double check and make sure if you don't put anything there, one is there. Should never be more than two. And you know, I really look at it where some of the boxes checked. I like it when you fill in the date, even if it's the same, like the water quality. If you do, are you going to test that? Then just put the 15 days or 20 days, whatever it is. It's more complete. And then again, I make sure that it's fully signed. 22RA is pretty much the same. I check and see how many days. and is it signed? 22S, I make sure there's one of these two boxes. It's either private or shared. And there are places that have like a small development that will have a shared septic system. There's a certain number, and I've forgotten how many you can have. I think this one was, they had it designed big enough for 12 homes. It was in Winthrop, and it was amazing what they did. I checked then here, title contingency. I just checked what have you checked? Does it make sense? And does it have the signatures? Same thing with VV. RAT and VV on residential are recommended that we have them on all. And I know it's a lot of forms, but that is what Russ has requested as our best practice. And I would say 95% of our brokers now include that. And when they don't, I will say best practice, we really recommend that you use this form. And then I'll always get one back that says, this is an attorney and he said he didn't need it. So it's not that it won't be approved. It's just that's what our recommendation are. So the VV, and I think it's really important that we make sure this document is in there, because insurance claims, if there's an exorbitant amount of them, it's like and if you get a couple of DUIs, guess what? The first thing they check, what pops up. Same thing in a house insurance. If it has a lot of stuff, there may not be insurance companies that want to insure that. So I say this is just a simple protection. I like to give more than 5 days, because if one doesn't work and then you have to hunt around. Just a little tidbit on that. If you can't find a broker, insurance broker, ask the sellers who are the sellers using currently and see if you can't work off of that one. 22Y. Once again, I look, and this on here, it says make sure it is date specific and not on or before. It's just not professional. It creates ambiguity. And if a buyer wants to get in there 10 days early and their loan has gone through and they're ready to finance it, and the sellers realize, oh my gosh, I'm barely going to get out of here by closing, then you've got, a potential there. So just honor before, don't use it. My best advice is then, if you can change it, check with escrow first. We're moving this up a week. Is that going to matter? And escrow should really be a part. That's a huge part of your team. Form 27, all we do is fill out the top, and then the rest of that is filled out by your HOA or it just makes sure that that person is up to date on their fees, if there are any assessments. It's something on a condominium that's really important. I cannot tell you how many I see that are not filled out. They just have buyer's initials and seller's initial and nothing's filled out, and they've uploaded it. And I send it back and say, no can do.
Does it have to be uploaded at the time you upload mutual?
No, it can't happen.
Well, that's what I'm saying. 'Cause you
Yeah.
Have already gotten it from the.
So you submit an offer, and then I like to give at least 10 days to have that manager be able to have it. I like to call them personally and say, if this is not enough time, let me know and I'll extend that so that you have plenty of time. I got one at the beginning of someone's vacation, and the replacement person knew nothing. And she was gone for 3 weeks, and we had to delay that for that whole time. So it's Huh?
Yeah.
One hell of a replacement.
Yeah. She says, I didn't even know I was supposed to do these. Yeah, yeah. Revert back to a teenager. I didn't know. Okay. Anyways, and then I make sure it's filled out and signed on every page. Okay. Form 34, we go over a lot and we give a lot of recommendations. Sometimes people will say per form, blah, blah, blah. The correct term is, if you're going to make a change in the contract and you're mutual and you're going to make a change, then start out, number one, reference form, the number, page number, item number, etc., and then put change to read or change to 12 days or whatever it is you're going to do. This makes it very clear and easy for escrow to know exactly, specifically what you're changing. I've seen some that were horrible. I mean, like paragraphs. And we have one broker that should have been in another life. They were an attorney because they write it like that. And I call them up and I say, I've got Russ's backing on this. Too much. Okay, Form 35, inspection. I just look if it's in the city and it's going to be hooked to the sewer, that's the only time you check that, and how many days. And this right here, if you're submitting it for the first time and it's not uploaded, then and it wouldn't be, the seller has to fill this in. We don't fill it in. And if you go through mutual and they have not checked any boxes, then we do the 35C, I think it is, where they will ask for the entire thing, part of it, and then inspector's recommendation for additional inspections. Okay, 35, I check. Seriously, it really, the compliance part of it, I'm not looking at the content, I'm looking for completeness. Okay, 35E. I bet I meant to say 35E on our handout. So on this one, it's really important that you fill this in when you're submitting it. And then if it is kept in a contract and you're uploading it, then this really needs to be filled out. If you submit it with a contract and they mark it through, then you don't have to upload this one. So remember, compliance is looking at the completed document. And so this little bugger is a mess to figure out. Your 35E has a manual that is great. Oh, I put it in here. Refer to Form 35E Escalation Addendum Manual for more information on filling this out. I have to look at that every time because they do like a negative and a positive, and it just totally messes me up. That's when I call in Tom. Okay, and then I check for that. 35R, inspection forms. Those I do by parts. And when I do a review them, I will say part 1, this is part 1, form 35R part 1, and then I'll say if their box is checked and the buyer has signed it, part 1 fully filled in, fully signed, ready for the seller's response. So if I get it back and part 1 is filled out right, part 2 is, then I'll respond and say parts 1 and 2, form 35R, parts 1 and 2, fully filled out, fully signed. And if it goes to the third response, then we need to make sure. I had one about a month ago where they didn't check any box, but they had the buyer sign it. And I sent it back to the broker. And I said, this isn't complete. Would you find out from that buyer broker, because it was our listing, what they are meaning to do on this? And the other broker got really upset. It's a checkbox. I mean, how difficult is that?
Upset about what?
Oh, that they made him check a box and then send it back. It's not complete. Which reminds me, if you ever have issues with other brokers from other firms, say, I'm really sorry. My compliance queen is a B. Blame it on me. I don't care. Okay, next let's go to Form 36. And in your cheat sheet, I reminded everybody, if you are representing the seller, then your seller's name goes on line 4, and you're sending it to the buyers. That goes on line 3. It's like a Valentine's card. Who do I represent? That's 4. Who am I sending it to? That's the buyer. That's 3. That's the easiest way for me to remember, because it is very confusing. And in your notes, it says seller to the buyer. You start this right here, and you do this counteroffer addendum takes precedent or supersedes any conflict or ambiguity in the original purchase and sale agreement today. And if you respond, remember now it's a brand new Form 36, and you respond all of the above that I just said and seller counteroffer. So that means that your counteroffer from a buyer to a seller, and then that means that here, then your buyers would be on line 4, and you're sending it back to the sellers who would be on line 3. And if there are parts of the contract that you are correcting, number 1, reference the form number, page name, change to read 12 days, or whatever it is that you go, and every single change in the contract. Doggone it, I had one that either Brian or Lisa got, and it had a total on the first page of the purchase and sale agreement. It had a total of 35 check boxes. Why not use a counter? Then you know exactly, it's very clear. And if your client doesn't agree with everything, then on your counter, you put what your client agrees, and you bring that forward. And if there's anything else, you put it there. It just makes it so much cleaner.
Also, it's super confusing to the escrow
Oh my.
people when they line out and use red and do these multiple things, changing things by crossing out. It makes it so complicated.
And Vanessa just said it makes it very complicated. If you get the urge to use a red line, say see counter offer Form 36 or something. Just really try hard. It's so professional that way. And let me tell you another example. So there was a back and forth, and there were like 3 different counter forms, and one of the brokers forgot to bring a really important one. They wanted a riding lawnmower. And the seller had agreed to it, but it didn't get on the final transition. Guess what?
Didn't get it.
No, the brokerage bought a used riding lawnmower. So actually, I think it was Russ, because he's the worst. Right? Okay, so that's my little statement. And remember, whoever signs here, they should be on line 4. They're the countersign. So whoever signs here, so when I look here and then I go up and I see their name is on line 3, then I'll write a note and say, this counter offer was incorrectly written. Now, there's not, if everybody agrees, there's not much you can do about it. But it's just as a broker, when you get that, don't let it go to your clients. Don't be afraid to say, you know, I hate this form because I never get it right. But in our contracts training class, they told us that whoever we're going to send it to, whoever you represent is on line 4, you're going to send it to line 3. And according to that, our compliance won't accept this. Can you just change that real quick? And most people are okay with that. Okay, and my favorite form, 17. I don't have on here. A special note, if it's an estate, put a note. This is exempt, I'll approve it, and it's done. So there are 3 things, and I did this on the listing. I first make sure every line has a box checked. Second, I make sure that if there are yes answers, there is explanation, asterisk yes answers on page 5. And third, is it fully and properly signed? I did not include that in this one because right now this is 38 pages long. So this particular document. This morning, I sent out last week's checklist and the document that's redlined. I love that. And then today I'll correct this one and I'll resend it out. Any questions? And I see nothing in the chat.
Marsha, when you
Are you
were
still
back,
with us, Sarah?
yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
She is there. All right, we're going to say goodbye. And thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Sarah. All righty. If there are no questions, then we are closing down.
Thank you.
You're like almost a minute on time.
Oh, look at that.
Look at you go.
See, that's why I didn't have Form 17 in.